I coded on that operating table for 11 seconds. 11 seconds where the world went white and nobody was holding my hand. 3 days later, I walked out of that hospital on my own 2 feet. Weak, stitched together, alive. And I couldn't get into my own house. The key didn't turn, not once, not twice. I stood on my own porch in the same jacket I wore into surgery, and I understood something in that moment that no doctor had warned me about. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones counting the minutes until you're gone. This is the story of how my son and his wife locked me out of my own life while I was still fighting for it, and how I made sure they'd never forget the mistake they made. My name is Robert Halloway. I'm 68 years old. For 41 years, I ran a small hardware store on 5th and Union, the kind of place that doesn't exist anymore, where I knew every customer's name and every customer knew mine. I raised one son, just one. His name is Trevor. And God help me, I loved that boy more than I loved my own health, my own money, my own peace of mind. His wife, Amanda, came into our lives 9 years ago. Pretty smile, sharp eyes, the kind of woman who calculates a room before she walks into it. I never said anything. What father wants to be the villain who doesn't like his son's wife? So I stayed quiet. I gave them money for their wedding. I gave them the down payment on their first house. I gave and gave and gave because that's what you do when you love someone. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that somewhere along the way, I stopped being their father and their father-in-law. I became a line item, a number, a countdown. It happened on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were the day I did inventory alone in the back of the store, the way I'd done for 4 decades. My chest felt like someone had reached in and squeezed my heart in their fist. I remember the floor coming up to meet me. I remember the taste of copper in my mouth. I remember thinking, clear as day, this is it. This is how it ends. Alone on a concrete floor surrounded by boxes of screws and paint cans, a customer found me. A stranger, not my son, not my daughter-in-law. A stranger named Gail, who I'd rung up maybe a dozen times in 15 years. She called the ambulance. She rode with me. She held my hand in the back of that ambulance while the paramedics worked, and she was still there when they wheeled me into the ER. Trevor arrived 2 hours later. Amanda didn't come at all that first night. I remember Trevor's face when he finally walked in. Pale, frightened. He held my hand and said, "Dad, don't you dare leave me." And in that moment, I believed him completely. I believed every word. That's the part that still cuts the deepest. I believed him. They took me into emergency surgery that night, triple bypass. The surgeon told me later, in that flat, clinical way doctors have, that my heart stopped on the table. 11 seconds. I don't remember those 11 seconds. I don't know if there was light or nothing, or my late wife's voice calling me home. I only know that when I came back, when the machines beeped and the room filled with motion again, I was still here. I woke up 2 days later in the ICU, tubes in my arms, a machine breathing for parts of me that had forgotten how. Trevor was there, asleep in the chair, still in the same clothes from 2 days before. For one moment, one fragile, beautiful moment, I thought, he never left. He stayed the whole time. I didn't know yet what he'd been doing every time he stepped out into the hallway to take a call. I found out about the calls 3 weeks later from a nurse named Priscilla, who had no idea what she was handing me. She mentioned, almost in passing, changing my IV. Your son sure was busy on the phone those first few nights. Real estate agent, I think. I heard him say something about getting ahead of it before he's back on his feet. I said nothing. I smiled at her the way you smile when your whole chest has just caved in for the second time in a month, except this time there was no surgeon standing by to save me. Getting ahead of it. Ahead of what? I didn't sleep that night. I lay in that hospital bed with monitors tracking every beat of a heart that had already stopped once, and I made myself a promise. I was going to find out exactly what getting ahead of it meant. I didn't have to wait long. I was discharged on a Thursday morning. 9 days in that hospital, 9 days of Jell-O cups and blood pressure cuffs, and Trevor visiting less and less as the week wore on, always with some excuse. Work, traffic, Amanda needing him for something at home. A hospital volunteer drove me back to my house because Trevor said he couldn't get away. I remember thanking her, thin and exhausted, my chest still wrapped and aching, walking up my own front porch steps for the first time in over a week. I put my key in the lock. It didn't turn. I tried again. I told myself it was the cold, the stitches in my chest making my hands unsteady. Anything but the truth standing right in front of me. I tried a third time. Nothing. My neighbor, Wendell, was out watering his lawn. He saw me standing there and walked over, and the look on his face told me he already knew something I didn't. Robert, he said carefully, you didn't hear? Trevor had the locks changed about a week ago. Said you'd probably be moving into assisted living once you were discharged, so they wanted to get the house ready to list. I stood on my own porch, 9 days removed from a heart that had stopped beating, and I laughed. Not because it was funny, because if I didn't laugh, I was going to fall apart right there on the steps my father built with his own hands 60 years ago. Here is what my son and his wife never bothered to find out in all their planning, in all their phone calls from hospital hallways. 12 years ago, after your grandmother, my mother, passed, I inherited the house next door to mine. Small place. I never sold it. I rented it out quietly, kept the income separate, told almost no one, because it was the last thing of my mother's I had left, and I wanted one thing in this world that was just mine. I still had a key to that house in my coat pocket, the same coat I'd worn into surgery. I also had something else they didn't know about. 3 years earlier, worried about exactly this kind of moment, I had transferred the deed to my main house, the one they'd just changed the locks on, into a revocable trust. Trevor's name was never on it. He assumed it would come to him automatically. He assumed a great many things. I walked past my own locked front door, down the block, and let myself into my mother's old house with the second key that had been sitting quietly in my pocket the entire time they thought they'd shut me out of everything. I sat down in that small, dusty living room, and for the first time since the ambulance ride, I felt something other than grief. I felt clarity. I didn't call Trevor that night. I let him call me. It took 4 days. 4 days of silence from a son who I'd raised alone after his mother died, who I'd carried on my shoulders at county fairs, who I'd taught to ride a bike in the parking lot of my hardware store on Sunday mornings when it was closed. When he finally called, his voice was tight. "Dad, where have you been? We've been trying to reach you." "I've been at my mother's house," I said. "Since Thursday, since the day I found out I couldn't get into my own home." Silence, a long one. "Dad, that's not—" "We were trying to help. The doctor said your recovery could take months, and Amanda thought it made sense to prep the house in case you needed to sell and move somewhere with, support." "Trevor." I let his name sit in the air the way you let a held breath out slowly. "You changed the locks on your father's house while I was under anesthesia. You didn't ask me. You didn't call me. You made a decision about my life while I was fighting to keep it." "I panicked," he said, "and for one single second, I heard the boy I raised underneath the man who'd become a stranger to me. I panicked, and Amanda said it was smart to move fast, and I didn't think." "No," I said quietly, "you didn't." "I asked them to come to my mother's house the following Sunday. Neutral ground. A house they didn't know existed until 4 days earlier. Amanda arrived in heels too sharp for a family conversation, a folder tucked under her arm like she was walking into a business meeting. Maybe, to her, she was. Trevor looked like he hadn't slept. I didn't raise my voice. I want that understood, because I know how these stories usually go. And this isn't one where I screamed and slammed my fist on a table. I've had enough of my heart stopping for one lifetime. I simply told them the truth. "The house is in a trust," I said. "It has been for 3 years. Neither of you had any legal right to change a single lock on that door. What you had was an assumption that I was old and sick and slow enough not to notice or not to matter." Amanda's face went white. Trevor's folder, the one with the real estate listing, the appraisal, the next steps, sat untouched on the table between us. "You could have asked me," I said. "That's the part I need you to understand, Trevor. Not the locks, not the listing. The fact that in 9 days of me fighting for my life, it never once occurred to either of you to simply ask what I wanted. I didn't disown my son. I want to be honest about that, too, because revenge makes for a satisfying story, but it doesn't always make for a true one. And this story is true. What I did do was this. I restructured the trust so that the house, my father's porch steps, my wife's garden, passes eventually to my grandchildren directly, held in the same kind of protection I'd once put around it for myself. Trevor will have a place to live in it as long as he needs, but he will never again have the power to lock a single door in that house without my permission or without earning back a trust he broke in 9 days flat. Amanda. I asked to leave the room during that final conversation, not out of cruelty, because some conversations are between a father and his son, and she had made herself a stranger to that particular bond the moment she called moving my furniture, getting ahead of it. Trevor comes by my mother's house, my house now, every Sunday. Sometimes we talk. Sometimes we just sit on the porch in silence, and that's all right, too. Trust doesn't rebuild in a straight line, and I've stopped expecting it to. I think about those 11 seconds sometimes, the ones where my heart stopped and the world went quiet. I used to wonder what almost took me that night. Now I know the real danger was never that operating table. It was walking out of that hospital and discovering that the people who were supposed to be waiting for me had already decided I wasn't coming back. They were wrong. I came back. And I made sure that this time, When I walked through my own front door, it was on my terms, with a key that was always and will always be mine.